Do not worry for 1 second, guys. There is no need to buckle up. There is no need to grab yourself a snack. Don't even bother trying to stay hydrated because I did not read very much in April, so this video is probably not going to be that long. I did participate in the Magical Readathon in April. I failed, which is kind of expected. So I did buy myself an extension and I'm going to be finishing out the Magical Readathon in May. All of my Magical Readathon progress you will see in the next episode of Shelve It or Scrap It whenever that drops. I'm still working on it. It is very, very long. But my main issue with April is that I was not home for most of it. I was traveling for 2 weeks and then I had like an early birthday weekend away in London. And so my priority was not reading. I do think that I did very well considering the amount of time that I was away, because it was, I think, like 18 days of the month. And the fact that I managed to read 5 books, none of which were particularly small, I'm still pretty impressed by. And then on top of that, something that is not accounted for within the stats for this month, because it will contribute to my reading statistics for May, is that I read most of this huge Wheel of Time book. This is 915 pages. And I think by the beginning of May, I was 500 to 600 pages into it, so I'd read like a considerable amount of this as well, ready for the live show at the very beginning of May. But in April I read 5 books, which added up to a total of 2,116 pages and broke down to an average of 71 pages per day. For the star ratings, it wasn't a great reading month. I had 1 2-star, 3 3-stars and 1 4, which broke down to an average of 3 stars per book. For the demographics, very little variety here. I read 5 adult books. For the formats, we had 2 standardly formatted books, 3 ebooks. For these genres, also not a lot of variety. There was 3 fantasy and 2 fantasy romance. And finally, for the places where I sourced these books, 3 of them were from my own TBR that existed prior to the start of 2025. 1 is a book that I've hauled this year, and 1 I borrowed on Kindle Unlimited. There were 2 key things that were happening in April. The first is that I was reading Chinese fantasy, which corresponded to my Magical Readathon TBR and also Shelve It or Scrap It, but the reason I was doing that is because I went to Hong Kong and China for 2 weeks. And the other thing is that I filmed the final installment in the Romantasy rundown, which is the secret project I was working on behind the scenes since the end of February to drop like throughout April while I was away. So all of the books that I read are for one of those 2 things. They're either fantasy romance or they are Asian fantasy. And I left for Hong Kong on the 3rd of April. So the first book we have is an Asian fantasy, and this one is The Night Ends with Fire by xxbeccabumxx. This one was actually my least favorite book of the month. It was my 2-star rating. I thought that it was fine. Essentially, I didn't think that it was bad. There just wasn't much about it that really stood out to me and gripped me. As an advance warning for this wrap up though, actually, I am distracted when I read when I travel. Most of these books were read in transit somewhat, and so I'm not going to be able to give you as many details as I typically do. And I feel like my level of enjoyment of these books wasn't necessarily impacted as much by travel. I don't think I would have given these books 5 stars if I'd have read them at home, but I do think that I enjoyed them even less, like I'm more ambivalent about them than I typically would be if I'd have read them at home, because they weren't instantly gripping to me, and so it was a lot harder for them to hold my attention. But this one in particular was the least memorable of everything that I read in April. I just thought that it was fine, and this one is a Mulan retelling following a girl whose father is quite abusive and he is selling her essentially to this man to be married, and she kind of wants to go to perform a duty for her family because she doesn't want her stepmother, or I think she's got 2 younger sisters, to bear the brunt of the punishment if she disappears. But this has also never been something that she wanted. She never wanted to be a wife. She never wanted to be a homemaker. And the fact that the guy that she's being married to is not a great man in general really seals the deal for her. So she disguises herself as a man, she runs away and she joins the army, and before long the country is at war. Now there is a love triangle in here here, which I have to say is the only element of this book that I was really invested in, and only really on one angle. So there are two love interests, one of which I thought was very, very bland, and one of which I thought was very, very intriguing. Now, in terms of this being a Mulan retelling, I feel like it stuck a little bit too closely to the source material for my liking, up until we introduced that second love interest. And I think that that is why a lot of this book doesn't stand out to me, because it is just a little bit too much of what I expected from something that is marketed as a Mulan retelling. But that little extra element that we have, and I'm really sad about this book actually, because I love this edition. This is the man that I'm talking about. But I just didn't really like the plot. I didn't love the writing. I don't feel like this book was as atmospheric as it could have been. And so the fact that I only really care about this one very volatile love interest is not enough to make me continue on with the series, sadly. And it is very sadly, because as well as the end paper art, which is gorgeous, it's generally just a really nice fairy loot edition. So I really wish that I had enjoyed this one. It did sound good as well, but it just wasn't a standout to me. One that I enjoyed a little bit better was of Jade and Dragons by Amber Chen. So this one is following a girl who disguises herself as a boy, but this time it is to join the Engineers Guild that her father attended when he was younger, because her father has been murdered, and he doesn't really talk, or he hasn't really spoken about his life in the guild, and he moved away to this like remote part of the country. I think it's an island community. And so when he's murdered, the main character just can't figure out why anybody would want to kill an engineer of this tiny community. So she goes to the Engineers Guild to try and find out a little bit more about his life when he was there, and also if anybody there is responsible or knows anything that could give her clues to her father's murder. Something that kind of makes sense because we're focusing on engineers in here, but actually really took me by surprise, is that this has a steampunk element to it. We have airships in here. The main character is trying to engineer her own like set of wings, very much at the beginning of this, like she's trying to learn how to fly. And it makes sense because we're talking about engineers, we're talking about inventions, but that took me by surprise. I was expecting like a very typical fantasy setting, and while that was jarring at the beginning, I ended up actually really enjoying it, because I did feel like this book stood out a little bit more because of that setting and made this a little bit more interesting to me. I didn't really become too attached to the characters in this, and my enjoyment definitely suffered because of that. I am a very character driven reader. I need to care. Like, they don't have to be likable necessarily, but I do have to care about them. They have to at the very least be interesting, and then if I like them, then I'm rooting for them, and that really helps my immersion and my enjoyment. And I just didn't quite get there with the characters of this one. I was also very intrigued about the Engineers Guild, and while that is a very prominent part of this story, I feel like we could have gone further. You know, when we have like magic school or training academy books, and we really spend a lot of the first book on the trials and tribulations of that setting, and the main character just kind of being there and experiencing it. Like, I wanted more of that from the Engineers Guild, and I feel like the focus was definitely on digging around outside of the like curriculum, which is fine because the main character is trying to figure out who killed her father. But I wanted the attention to be split more kind of between that and also the main character excelling in this school, because a big part of this as well is that she is the eldest daughter in her family, so she has a responsibility to marry and to secure good connections for her family. And because she's the eldest daughter, that pressure is extremely heavy on her shoulders, and all she wanted to do was follow in her father's footsteps. So for her to be able to have this opportunity and go to the Engineers Guild, I wish that the focus of the book was just a little heavier on that element. And it may have been a little bit indulgent as well, because the reason why I wanted this explored is because school and academy settings are my favorites, but I do feel like that would have made this book a little bit more enjoyable. I did very much like this one. I gave it 3 stars. I enjoyed the writing, I liked the atmosphere, but my level of investment in the characters and also my interest in the plot was not strong enough for me to want to continue on on with this series. I then came home and I started working on the final episode of the Romantasy rundown, which if you have not checked that series out yet, I have now published all of the episodes, so the whole series is there in its entirety. But in that project, I read the first 12 books of the Fairy Loot Romantasy subscription to try and figure out what Romantasy is as a genre, like what the term actually means, and also my relationship to it as somebody who thought that fantasy romance or romantasy was my favorite genre. And then in the like recent year or two, I've been really struggling to actually find books labeled romantasy that I actually enjoy. So it's kind of like an exploration of the genre that also contains like an audit of the Fairy Loot Romantasy subscription. Like I gathered a bunch of data throughout the whole thing that I thought was really informative and helped me to answer those questions. So there are 4 episodes in total and then a wrap up. And when I got home from China, I did start episode 4. Now the first book that I read for that was actually not a book in the subscription because I substituted one of them for Blood and Steel by Helen Shorer. So this is the first book in the Legends of Thesmar series. I'm pretty sure that this is still an indie pub series in the UK, and it has a training academy done in a way that I really enjoyed. So this one is following a young woman who lives in a world where women are not allowed to be warriors. In the past, they were allowed to be warriors, but there has been a prophecy that says, I'm paraphrasing here, but it's something like a woman that wields a blade is going to bring about darkness. So they stopped women from fighting, from being allowed to bear arms because of this prophecy to try and avoid it. And our main character has only ever wanted to be one of the guardians that protects the realm, and especially one of the legendary warriors of Thesmar, who are these like elite warriors that are better than the rest of the regular guardians. So this is something that she obviously isn't allowed to be, but because of a certain set of circumstances, she is allowed to petition the, I can't remember if they're like a guild or just like a council of the academy, and also the royalty of the land, to be allowed to train as one of these guardians. This dream is particularly important to her as well, because she had her fate told when she was very young, and it told her that she was going to die when she was 27. So at this point in her life, if she's going to achieve this dream, she only has 3 years to do so. And then throughout this entire process of trying to gain entrance into the academy, she has an escort, which is one of these Legends of Thesmar called Wilder Hawthorne, who is one of the, there's only 3 of them left, because over the years, especially with women not being allowed to train, the numbers of guardians are dwindling, and so the pool of ones at the top are getting like especially small. And he is one that everybody's a little bit scared of. He's a little bit aloof, he isolates himself, and he is definitely a dark, grumpy, brooding character. So this book executed a bunch of tropes, themes, plot devices, and like character dynamics that I really enjoy in a way that I really enjoyed, and for that reason I gave this one 4 stars. However, I don't think that this book reinvented the wheel. It was very much in line with a bunch of series that I've read and really enjoyed in the past, like the Claire Sager series that I read towards the end of last year, also like the first couple of books of the Blood and Ash series by Jennifer L. Armentrout. A Crown of Oaths and Curses, I think, is the name of the Jade Dragons book that I also liked. So it was in the same kind of vein as all of those books in terms of like the character archetypes, the pacing, the way that tension is built, the way that the kind of plot builds. And for that reason, I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the tension between our main characters. I love a slow burn, and this book definitely provided that. And something that I really loved is that it continued to throw obstacles in the path of our hero and heroine. I like a series that follows the same couple from start to finish, but in a way that kind of prolongs the tension without it feeling like it's just being done for the sake of prolonging the tension. You know that that's the reason why it's being done if you read enough of these books, but semi-realistic obstacles being thrown into their path so that they can't be together. And this book definitely provided that, as well as having this like warrior training academy presented in a way where the focus of that section of the book is the warrior training academy and the trials that our main character has to overcome. We had adversaries in there because there's a lot of sexism within the academy now because women have been absent for so long, and conflicts that really push you to root for our main character, and also kind of rooting for the love interest intervening from time to time. This also had like the who who did this to you microtrope and the like touch her and you die kind of vibe, which I really loved. So this one ticked all of the boxes for me. It just didn't do anything kind of like past that made it unique enough for me to give it 5 stars. But I'm very excited to continue on with this series and then eventually progress to the spin-off series, which focuses on our main character's sister. The final book that I read for the Romantasy rundown was Firebird by Juliet Cross. So this one is actually quite a controversial one at the moment, and I'm not really going to touch upon the controversy here because I did talk about it in depth while I was reading it for the Romantasy rundown. So if you guys want to know more about that or my thoughts on it, then there's like at least 15 minutes of me discussing it in that vlog that you can go and check out. So this one is a historical fantasy romance that is set during the height of the Roman Empire, and our love interest is one of the generals. He's the nephew to the emperor, and the one key thing that makes this fantastical is that the people who are especially powerful within the Roman Empire can shift into dragons, and this lore comes from Romulus and Remus, who suckled at the teat of a dragon and gained shapeshifting abilities. So as well as the Roman Empire just generally being very powerful, they are extra powerful because at a moment's notice they can turn into a dragon, and then they also have this like in-between form that they can settle into as well, where they're like men but bigger with scales and all sorts of other gross things. I'm not a big shapeshifter girly, I have to be honest. But this one is following a young woman from a village that is destroyed by the Romans. So she joins with the Celts, and when the Celts are defeated by the Romans, she is taken into slavery by our love interest, who has this instinctual pull to her. Now there is a key difference with this general in that he is covertly fighting against the brutality of the Roman Empire. So she is a slave of his household, that is under no discussion, she 100% is, but he does not treat his slaves with the brutality that everybody else does, and he's kind of just biding his time until he can overthrow his uncle and completely change what the Roman Empire has very gradually become over the course of the last few emperors that they've had. This one I gave 3 stars. There were things that I liked about it. One thing that I did really enjoy about this is Juliet Cross does not shy away from the cruelty of the Roman Empire, and we have a lot of instances in here of casual cruelty. There are a bunch of content warnings that go along with this book, so you kind of know what you're getting into before you do, but there is a lot of sexual assault, sometimes depicted quite casually. There is also a master-slave relationship which forms the romantic relationship in here. There is also just generally lots of things like torture, brutality, oppression running throughout the entire thing. Something that I liked about this is that the way that this is introduced, the way it doesn't shy away from the cruelty of the Roman Empire, reminded me a lot of like adult epic fantasy, and I felt like the beginning was really setting us up to go down that route of a really gritty epic fantasy that had a romantic subplot. However, the reason why I ultimately gave this book 3 stars is because the further we get into the book, the more dominant the romance becomes, and it is not a romance that I particularly cared for. As I mentioned, this book is the subject of a lot of controversy right now, partially because it depicts a master-slave relationship at the forefront, which is not a dynamic that particularly works for me or one that I am particularly interested in. And I also really didn't like the smut in here. I didn't like the language that was used. I didn't really feel the attraction between them, like the sexual tension just wasn't there for me. And so the more that we kind of strayed into romantic territory and away from the politics and the fantasy of this world, the less interested I became in it. Now, the books in this series are going to follow a different couple per book. I think the female main characters are going to be members of the main character Melina's family, with the love interest being influential Romans. So I do think it is going to continue to follow this, not necessarily all of them being master-slave relationships, but definitely with great power imbalances throughout the series. And because I do prefer a series where the plot continues to develop as the romantic bond between the couple strengthens, with the trajectory of this book tipping more towards romance than the fantasy element that I really enjoyed. Don't think I'm going to be continuing on with this one because I expect it to kind of follow that same pattern throughout each installment in this series. And then the final book that I read was The Teller of Small Fortunes by Julie Leong. So this one, I'm no expert in cozy fantasy. I don't read cozy fantasy. It's not something that I'm drawn to. It's not something that I seek out. This has been labeled as cozy fantasy. Whether it is a true cozy fantasy or not, I cannot tell you because it's not a genre that I'm experienced in, but it has more of a plot than I traditionally associate with something that I would describe as cozy. And also it feels kind of in line thematically with things like the Wayfarer series by Becky Chambers, which is not a series that I would describe as cozy. But in this one, we are following a traveling fortune teller called Tao, who has left her home because she's had a disagreement with her family, and she is traveling the country telling small fortunes because she doesn't want the responsibility of telling great fortunes, which can greatly alter the paths of people's lives and that they can't escape. So along the way, she meets a mercenary and a thief, and she discovers that the mercenary's daughter is missing. And after giving the mercenary a prophecy where she tells him that he's going to give his daughter a kitten, she discovers that the mercenary's daughter has actually been kidnapped, and the mercenary and the thief are out trying to find her. So they ask the fortune teller if they can travel with her, and as they are going town to town telling fortunes and looking for the mercenary Mash's daughter, the story unfolds. This is a book that does heavily rely on themes, with the main structure following the fortunes that Tao is telling. And part of the discussion of this book is how you don't really know what is small and what is big in people's lives. Like with the fortune that Tao told to Mash, where he said she thought that her fortune was innocuous, like you're going to give your daughter a kitten, but actually that was a bigger revelation than anyone assumed that it would be because Mash's daughter is missing. So it's kind of about how you don't really know what's going on in anybody else's life, and how the small things can be big and the big things maybe are not so much of a big deal. And I really liked that we had a slow focus on those elements of this story while also exploring the reasons why Tao has left home and her relationship with her family and what exactly it is that she's running from, while we're also following our thief character as he is discovering his identity, and also Mash, who has a lot of regrets about his life and is just trying to find his daughter. This reminded me a lot of Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher in the way that it was laid out as well, in that it is a group of characters who are on a quest, and along the way they meet new people who either join their cause or change their trajectory, and it's more about the journey than it is the destination. My favorite thing about this book, however, was the development of the world, because even though the scope of the plot was small, the world felt expansive. It felt fully fleshed out. It felt like Julie Leong could put a lot of thought into it, even though all of these elements of the world were not necessarily super relevant to the plot. So it felt very atmospheric, very realistic, as our main characters are navigating all of the different areas of this world, different reactions that they face, because our main character Tao is from a place called Shannara, and she is in somewhere called, I think is it Ashtara, where people very much notice that she looks different to the people around her and respond positively or negatively based on that. And that is something that, as she's constantly traveling, she has to navigate at the beginning of pretty much every conversation that she has with new people. We also have a mages guild in here, which is relevant to the plot but was not explored to its entirety, and I really loved that element of it. So there's lots of this book that I kind of wish that we lingered on a little bit more. As somebody who does read a lot of very intricate epic fantasy with huge plots that do interact with all of these different elements of a world, but I do also understand that that is not the point of this story. That is not the focus of this story. So I did end up giving this one 3 stars. I loved the writing, I loved the atmosphere, I loved the world. The story, however, just not necessarily for me. Like, it was nice, I enjoyed it, but I don't think I will think about this book a lot in hindsight, and I don't see myself ever picking it up for a reread. So those were the few books that I read in April. The only one of these books that's really very small is The Teller of Small Fortune, so I am quite happy with what I've read. It is not as much as I would have liked to read, but given the circumstances of April, I feel like I did pretty well, so I'm not very upset about it. It has made me a little bit behind, like a combination of traveling and also working on the Romantasy rundown in the background has left me behind on where I should be for my various book clubs and other projects like Shelve It or Scrap It that I have ongoing. So I'm focusing May. If you haven't seen my TBR, my main focus of May is just trying to catch up and make a dent in the backlog that I now have. But I also, after spending so much time away from home, I really don't want to go anywhere this month, and I'm quite happy to spend my time at home reading my books. So down in the comments, let me know if you have any thoughts on any of these, but also let me know what your favorite book that you read in May was. I think that mine is definitely Blood and Steel, but I'm also happy that I got through a bunch of subscription box books in April, because those are the ones that tend to, or can tend to, linger around for a long time without me picking them up. But if you guys would like to let me know that you were here but you don't feel like you have anything to say, leave me a blossom emoji down in the comments. But aside from that, guys, I do hope that you have enjoyed this video. If you have, please don't forget to like if you liked it and subscribe if you wanna. If you head down to my description box, you will find a link to my Goodreads, my Instagram, and my Patreon if you want to follow me on any of those. That's it from me today, guys. Bye!
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you're go where nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.